Alien girl misreads human's silence as insult, but human realizes silence is her people's prayer. Hello everyone. Before we begin today's story, I have a small favor to ask. Please hit subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you never miss our channel's new videos. It's quick, free, and the best way to support us in bringing you more dramatic stories. Your support means the world to us. Where are you watching from? Drop your city or country in the comments below. Thank you very much. Now, let's return to our main character. Ethan Cole stepped into the observation wing just as the outer storm hit, a low tremor running through the metal ribs of the outpost. Frost crystals drifted across the floor like pale dust, catching the glow from the safety lights overhead. He didn't speak. He rarely did when he was assessing equipment. His mind narrowed to the quiet hum of pressure gauges and the faint click of a thermal relay struggling to stay online. Behind him, Sayla turned from the viewing window, her silhouette edged by the cold blue reflection of the planet below. Her people carried silence like a blade or a shield, and when Ethan didn't acknowledge her presence, her chest tightened in a quiet sting. To her, silence directed at a person meant dismissal, a sign that the other deemed her unworthy of recognition. She straightened her posture, the bioluminescent lines along her neck dimming in hurt. Ethan didn't notice. He was kneeling by a junction box, fingers brushing dust from a hairline crack in the panel. No words, not even a greeting. Sayla's voice came soft but rigid. "Human, is my presence a burden to you?" Ethan paused, lifted his head slightly as if he'd heard something distant, then returned to studying the crack. Again, silence. Her pulse fluttered with confusion. She folded her hands behind her back, trying to hide how deeply the moment cut. "You refuse to speak to me. That is your answer." Ethan finally stood, wiping frost from his gloves. But before he could say anything, the lights flickered and a sharp vibration shuddered through the outpost, followed by the muted groan of the support struts. Sayla stumbled as the floor lurched. Ethan caught her arm instinctively, his grip steady, warm even through her uniform. He didn't speak, not a single word, just made sure she had her balance. Before gently releasing her, she stared at him, baffled. His silence wasn't cold. It wasn't hostile. It felt deliberate, focused. The storm outside intensified, rattling the reinforced glass. Ethan moved toward the inner corridor, and for a moment Sayla simply watched him, struggling to understand why a man who said nothing had not made her feel small when he touched her arm, but safe. She followed him, her steps slow, mind spinning around a question she had never asked of another species. What if silence meant something different to him? And what if she had been wrong from the start? The corridor lights dimmed to their emergency glow as Ethan guided Sayla toward the inner safety bay, the soft vibration under their feet a steady reminder of the storm pushing against the outpost walls. He walked with that same quiet precision she had noticed earlier, his attention split between the flickering panels overhead and the readings pulsing across his handheld scanner. Sayla watched him from the corner of her vision, her thoughts tangled. She had prepared herself for hostility or condescension, but not for this calm, wordless focus that seemed to wrap the air around him. When they reached the safety bay, Ethan tapped the control panel, checking its pressure lock before stepping aside for her. She hesitated, expecting him to speak, to offer explanation or direction. Instead, he gave a small nod, a gesture so gentle it startled her more than a raised voice ever could. Inside, the bay lights settled into a soft amber hue. The hum of the filtration system filled the silence between them, a low rhythmic pulse. Sayla moved to the bench along the wall and sat carefully, her injured shoulder still tender. Ethan knelt to inspect the heating vent, adjusting a loose panel. Still no words. She pressed her palms together, steadying her breath. Do humans withhold speech when they are displeased? Ethan glanced back, brow furrowing slightly as if he was deciding how to answer. Then, after a long pause, he wiped his hands on his utility belt and shook his head. Not annoyed, just thinking. The realization softened something inside her. "Among my people," she said quietly, "silence placed upon another is an insult. It means we deny their presence. We deny their worth." Ethan's expression shifted, a flicker of understanding crossing his features. He pointed to his own chest lightly, then mimed, focusing on equipment, not ignoring, concentrating. The storm rumbled again, a distant thunder rolling across the outer plate. This time, Selah did not flinch. Instead, she studied the man in front of her. His silence had edges she did not recognize, not sharp, not cold. More like a space he created so he could understand the world before he stepped into it. "Your silence," she murmured, "does not feel like the silence of my people." Ethan raised a hand, hesitated, then tapped his chest twice, gentle, deliberate. His version of saying, "I am here." The simplicity of it warmed her more than the heating vent beginning to hum at her side. Her gaze drifted to the observation window, where thin trails of charged particles streaked across the darkness. "For my people," she added softly, "true silence is sacred. We use it to honor moments we cannot yet name." Ethan listened, still without interruption, his posture open in a way she had not expected from a human she barely knew. She felt the weight of her earlier assumptions settling into place, reshaping themselves. Perhaps he was not withholding anything at all. Perhaps his quiet was his offering. The outpost speakers crackled faintly, announcing that the storm would pass within the hour. Selah exhaled, tension easing from her shoulders. She looked at Ethan one more time, catching the faint half-smile that tugged at the corner of his mouth. It was not loud. It was not a declaration. But it was enough to tell her she had not been dismissed. Not by him. Outside, the storm eased, and for the first time since their misunderstanding began, Selah allowed the silence between them to settle without fear, wondering what meaning it might hold for him, and, possibly, for both of them. The storm weakened to a distant whisper along the outpost walls, leaving the air inside the safety bay warmer and steady. Ethan checked the status panel, confirming stability before stepping back and letting the soft hum of the systems return to their usual rhythm. Selah watched him move, noting how he absorbed each detail in silence, the way his eyes narrowed a little when reading instrument values, the way his shoulders lowered when he was satisfied everything was safe. She had mistaken that quiet focus for rejection earlier. Now she felt its shape differently, as if his silence was a doorway rather than a wall. Ethan approached her slow enough to avoid startling her, then gestured lightly to her injured shoulder, asking permission without words. Selah nodded. He scanned the area with a compact medical reader, its soft green light reflecting against her blue skin. No harmful readings, just surface strain from the earlier impact. He adjusted the sling on her uniform with careful precision, making sure not to cause discomfort. Again, no words. But this time, she understood the intention clearly. When he finished, she tilted her head, studying him. "Among my people," she said softly, "we are taught that every action carries a message. Words only amplify what is already present." Ethan looked up, curiosity brightening his eyes. She continued, "When you helped me earlier, the message was not rejection. It was care." Ethan lowered his gaze for a moment, almost shy, before offering a single nod. The outpost lights flicked back to full brightness, signaling the end of the worst turbulence. They stepped into the corridor together, the metal floors still cool beneath their boots. The panels along the walls glowed a gentle blue as the system recalibrated for normal operation. Selah walked more slowly than usual, partly because of her shoulder, partly because she wanted to understand this human who spoke in gestures and pauses instead of words. As they reached the central junction, Ethan tapped his wrist console and brought up the environmental logs. Selah leaned in slightly to see, the gentle shimmer of her bioluminescent markings reflecting subtly against the screen. She felt a quiet calm settle between them, something steadier than before. "Human silence is still strange to me," she admitted. "But yours," she hesitated, searching for the right comparison. "Yours feels like a space where thought grows, not a punishment." Ethan glanced at her, an almost imperceptible smile touching the corner of his mouth. He tapped the screen and pointed to a rising temperature graph, showing that the outpost would return to full comfort levels within minutes. A silent reassurance. As they continued forward, the corridor windows revealed the planet's surface below, the storm clouds beginning to break apart into thin glowing bands. Selah slowed, drawn to the sight. Ethan stood beside her, quietly sharing the moment. The silence that stretched between them now was gentle, intentional, almost peaceful. She folded her hands at her center, an echo of her people's ritual stance, but softened so that it would not be mistaken for prayer. "You're quiet," she said, is teaching me that there are forms of silence I have never known. Ethan looked at her with a thoughtful expression, and though he did not speak, the steady presence beside her felt like its own reply. For the first time since arriving on the outpost, Selah allowed the silence to settle around them without defense or fear, sensing that this shared quiet might be the beginning of a language only the two of them could understand. Shift change had not yet begun, so the central junction stood quiet except for the soft pulse of the floor panels restoring full power. Ethan checked the last environmental reading, then lowered his wrist console, satisfied. Selah watched the way he moved through each task, steady and grounded, like someone who trusted the world to make sense if he just listened long enough. She admired that. Her people often filled silence with meaning, with expectation, but Ethan seemed to let silence breathe, as if it needed space of its own. They walked together toward the auxiliary lab, where system diagnostics needed to be reset after the storm. The hallway lights reflected faintly across Selah's bioluminescent markings, creating a shifting pattern along the walls. Ethan glanced at the reflection and slowed his pace so she would not feel rushed. She noticed. "Your stillness is unusual for a human," she said softly. "Most I have met fill silence quickly, like pouring water into every empty space." Ethan paused, thinking about that, then gave a small shrug. He pointed to his ear, then tapped the metal wall lightly, suggesting he preferred to listen first. Selah's expression warmed. "Listening is considered an art among my people," she replied, "but only when done in true silence. It is why our rituals require absence of sound. Without it, our minds cannot settle." Ethan lifted a brow slightly, inviting her to continue. She hesitated, not out of doubt, but out of respect for sharing something sacred. "A literary prayer is not spoken," she explained. "It is a stillness we offer to the universe. A moment when we step aside and allow understanding to come forward instead." Ethan absorbed her words with a seriousness that made her feel unexpectedly understood. His silence here did not push her away. It drew her closer. Inside the auxiliary lab, a soft amber light illuminated the consoles. Ethan began resetting the calibration nodes, his fingers brushing across the controls with the same deliberate calm she had come to recognize. When one of the panels flickered, he leaned in, listening to the pitch of its internal components before adjusting a small dial. No rush, no frustration, just presence. Selah stepped closer, her shoulder brushing the faint warmth of the nearby heater. "Among the Lithari," she said, "we believe a person's intentions echo louder than their voice. When your silence confused me earlier, it is because I did not yet know the intention behind it." Ethan glanced up, a question in his eyes. She answered with a small, steady smile. "Now I do." He returned the smile, brief but genuine, before turning his attention back to the calibration sequence. The machine's soft chimes signaled completion, and Selah found herself wishing the moment would stretch a little longer. As they left the lab, the corridor ahead opened to a wide observation deck. The storm had cleared enough to reveal the curve of the planet below, streaked with pale gold where sunlight touched the upper atmosphere. Selah slowed, drawn to the view. Ethan stood beside her, hands resting at his sides, sharing the silence without expectation. She breathed in deeply, letting the moment settle. "In my language," she said quietly, "there is a phrase that means silence of respect. It is used when we honor someone without speaking. I think," she paused, a soft glow rising in the markings along her jaw. "I think your silence may be closer to that than you realize." Ethan met her gaze, his expression calm, steady, carrying a depth she had not understood until now. And as the planet turned slowly beneath them, Selah discovered that silence shared with him did not feel empty at all. It felt like the beginning of understanding. Even after they stepped away from the observation deck, the quiet they had shared lingered between them like a soft echo. The outpost had settled into its normal rhythm, with distant ventilation fans humming and the soft pulse of the corridor lights guiding their path. Ethan and Selah walked side by side toward the maintenance hub, their steps naturally falling into the same pace. Selah glanced at him, observing the easy steadiness in his movements. She felt an unfamiliar calm settling within her chest, a sense that the distance between their worlds had narrowed in ways she had never anticipated. Inside the hub, Ethan activated the diagnostic table. A holographic map of the outpost flickered into view, displaying minor fluctuations left behind by the storm. He pointed toward the energy conduits on the lower level, indicating they would need to be checked before the next cycle. Sayla nodded, stepping closer to study the glowing pathways. Her fingertips hovered above the display, her markings glowing faintly as the heat of the projection brushed her palm. Ethan watched her approach, noting how her shoulders relaxed in the warm light. When she looked up, she found him studying her with quiet curiosity, and for the first time she did not misinterpret the silence that followed. "You are wondering something," she said gently. Ethan hesitated, then tapped his wrist console and brought up a recording of the earlier environmental logs. He pointed to the moment she had stood perfectly still in the safety bay, her breath slowing, her posture centered. Then he gestured to his own chest, asking the question without words. Sayla exhaled softly. "Yes," she said, "that was a prayer." She moved around the table, standing across from him. Each Lithari prayer is a way of grounding the spirit. We do not speak it aloud, because spoken words can never contain the entire meaning. Silence does. Ethan absorbed that with a thoughtful nod. He raised his hand slowly and mimicked the posture she had held earlier, not perfectly, but respectfully. The gesture startled her in the gentlest way. No human had ever attempted to mirror a sacred stance of her people. She stepped closer, adjusting his hand slightly so the alignment matched tradition. "It is about intention," she explained. "Your spirit must be steady." Ethan held her gaze, his expression earnest, silent, and open. In that moment, Sayla felt something shift in the quiet space between them. She guided his breathing with a simple motion of her hand, and he followed without hesitation. The storm had left the outpost in a fragile state, yet here they were building something steady in its wake. When the diagnostic table chimed, signaling that the next scan was ready, both of them stepped back, though neither moved far. Sayla returned her attention to the holographic map, but her thoughts remained on the human beside her. She had believed silence to be a rigid thing, shaped only by her culture's rules, but Ethan's presence had reshaped it into something spacious and calm. "There is a form of silence we reserve for someone we trust," she said quietly, still looking at the map. "It is offered only when we know the other will not misuse it." Ethan turned toward her, his expression steady and sincere, and Sayla realized she had already begun offering him that silence without noticing. Outside, the last traces of the storm drifted away over the planet's curve, and in the quiet heart of the outpost, a new understanding settled between them, fragile but growing, like light rising after a long night. The final diagnostic sweep finished with a soft tone, leaving the holographic map fading back into the table. The outpost felt calmer now, its system stable, its halls warmed by returning circulation. Ethan powered down the console and motioned toward the main corridor, silently suggesting they check the lower-level conduits next. Sayla followed, the low hum of the lights reflecting softly along her markings as they walked. The quiet between them had changed again, not heavy, not uncertain, but full of steady presence. When they reached the service lift, Ethan tapped the panel. A brief delay flickered across the screen, a leftover glitch from the storm. He frowned slightly and tapped again, careful, patient. Sayla watched his hands move with that same deliberate calm she had come to recognize as his natural rhythm. The lift door slid open, and they stepped inside. As the platform descended, Sayla rested one hand along the rail, adjusting her balance as the machinery shifted. Ethan stood beside her, close enough that she could sense his awareness without needing to look directly at him. The soft hum of the lift filled the silence. "Ethan," she said quietly, "when you mirrored the prayer stance earlier, it meant something." He turned to her, waiting. "That gesture is usually only performed by one who seeks clarity," she explained. "It is not something done casually." Ethan nodded in understanding, but she sensed a question beneath his expression. So she added, "It means you were not merely observing. You were trying to understand." He gave a slight shrug, humble but honest. She felt warmth rising in her chest, subtle but steady. When the lift doors opened onto the lower level, cooler air brushed against them. The floor panels glowed a deeper shade of blue here, guiding them toward the conduit access array. Ethan knelt by the nearest panel, opening a service hatch and examining the energy regulators nestled inside. Sayla crouched beside him, careful with her shoulder, watching the soft lights pulse like tiny heartbeats along the internal wiring. "When I first met you," she admitted, "your silence felt sharp. It felt like refusal." Ethan paused his work, lifting his gaze. "But now," she continued, "I understand that your silence is shaped by your focus, not by rejection." He nodded slowly, confirming her interpretation without speaking. She felt the quiet settle warmly between them. Together, they monitored the flow stabilizing across the conduit lines. A faint glow reflected across Ethan's face, softening the edges of his concentrated expression. Selah found herself studying him with new awareness, not with caution, but with respect. "Among the Lithari," she said, "misunderstanding another's silence often leads to conflict." She touched the conduit lightly, feeling its warmth. "But sometimes, discovering a new kind of silence leads to connection instead." Ethan met her gaze, and though he said nothing, the steadiness in his eyes felt like a shared truth. The conduit array emitted a gentle chime, indicating full stability. Ethan stood and offered Selah a hand, a gesture simple and grounded. She accepted it, rising with a soft intake of breath as her injured shoulder adjusted. For a moment, neither of them moved. The silence stretched gently, full of meaning neither had to name. As they walked back toward the lift, Selah realized she no longer feared the spaces between words. Not with him. With Ethan, silence had become something else entirely, something closer to understanding, something she had not known she could share with a human. And as the lights guided their way upward, she carried that realization with quiet pride, knowing that the next conversation between their worlds might begin with no words at all. The lift carried them back toward the upper levels, its slow rise accompanied by the steady hum of machinery. Selah stood beside Ethan, her hand resting lightly on the rail, her breathing calm and even. The quiet between them had settled into something familiar, something she no longer tried to decipher with suspicion. When the doors slid open, a cooler draft drifted in from the corridor, carrying the faint metallic scent of the outpost's recycled air. Ethan stepped out first, scanning the updated status readout on the nearest wall panel. Everything appeared stable, but he tapped the screen twice to confirm. Selah watched the way his brow furrowed just slightly when he concentrated. It had become a recognizable signal to her, one that spoke louder than many sentences she had heard from humans. They walked together toward the operations wing, where the communication relays were stored. The storm had caused a brief data backlog, and Ethan wanted to ensure the relay queues did not overflow. Selah followed, letting her fingertips skim the glowing guide strip along the wall. The light warmed beneath her touch, responding to her biometrics. "Ethan," she said gently, "I have been thinking about something." He glanced back, attentive. "Earlier, when we repaired the conduits, you held silence in a way that felt intentional. My people call that a chosen stillness. It is rare for outsiders to use it correctly." Ethan tilted his head slightly, prompting her to continue. "It means you were offering attention without trying to control the moment," she explained. "It is a gesture of trust." His expression softened, and Selah felt a quiet warmth settle in the space between them. Inside the operations wing, soft blue lights illuminated the curved array of communication modules. Ethan began scanning each relay, checking for corrupted packets. The screen glowed across his face, highlighting the small details of concentration she now recognized so easily. Selah stepped closer, watching the data scroll upward. "When I first arrived at this outpost," she said, "I prepared myself to face misunderstanding. Humans speak quickly. They fill silence because they fear what it might reveal." Ethan paused, glancing at her thoughtfully. "But you." She let the thought linger, not rushing it. "You treat silence like a tool, not a threat." Ethan held her gaze for a moment before returning to the relay diagnostics, his silence once again holding meaning she could now read clearly. The relay console emitted a soft chime, signaling that one of the modules needed manual reset. Ethan motioned for her to follow him toward the maintenance alcove. She did, her steps light against the polished floor. When he opened the panel, a cascade of soft lights reflected along her skin, amplifying the gentle glow of her bioluminescent markings. He reached for the manual override lever, but Selah rested her hand lightly on his arm. "Allow me," she said. He stepped aside, giving her space without a word, but with unmistakable respect. She pressed her palms together briefly, grounding herself in a literary gesture of clarity, then extended her hand toward the module. Her touch activated the secondary interface, which responded to her unique bioelectric pattern. The relay reset with a shimmering pulse. Ethan exhaled quietly, impressed. Selah turned to him. Among my people, sharing a moment of chosen stillness means we acknowledge one another's spirit. It is personal. Ethan absorbed her words, his expression steady, warm. She sensed no discomfort from him, only understanding. That alone felt like a gift. As they walked back toward the main corridor, the lights above them dimmed into evening mode, painting soft shadows across the walkway. Selah found herself slowing, drawn to the gentle quiet enveloping them. She looked at Ethan, her voice barely above a breath. I no longer fear your silence. Ethan stopped, meeting her eyes fully. In the stillness that followed, she felt something settle deep within her. A connection shaped not by words, but by everything they had learned to hear in the quiet. Evening mode settled fully across the outpost, soft strips of amber light guiding Ethan and Selah down the central corridor. The place felt different now, quieter in a way that felt intentional rather than empty. Selah walked just slightly behind Ethan, watching how his shoulders relaxed when the day's work eased, how his steps shifted from precise to comfortable. She had come to understand these small changes as clearly as spoken words. They approached the atmospheric regulator room, where final checks were required to ensure the storm had left no residual imbalance. Ethan keyed the door, stepping inside, and a warm current washed over them as the internal systems recalibrated. The room glowed with gentle pulses of orange and blue, each light shift reflecting across Selah's markings. She paused near one of the central columns, letting her hand hover above the heat vent. Your outpost feels calmer now, she said softly. Ethan nodded, confirming with a light tap on the nearest gauge. He walked toward the main console, bringing up the regulator graphs. The curves flowed smoothly, a sign that the system had fully recovered. Selah joined him, her presence close but not intrusive. There is something I have not told you, she said, her voice steady but quieter than usual. Ethan turned toward her, waiting. When a lithari misinterprets silence, the consequences can be severe. Not physically, she clarified quickly, but emotionally. Silence touches our spirit. It can wound, or it can lift. Ethan's brow softened with understanding. She continued, earlier today, when I thought your silence was directed at me, I felt something collapse inside. It is the deepest form of dismissal my people know. Ethan inhaled slowly, regret flickering across his face. But Selah raised her hand gently, stopping him before he could attempt an apology. You did nothing wrong, she said. The misunderstanding was mine. I placed the meaning of my people onto the silence of yours. Ethan looked down briefly, as if absorbing the weight of her words. Then he lifted his gaze again, steady and sincere. That steadiness eased her heart. She had feared admitting this, feared it would create distance between them. Instead, it felt like the final piece of an unspoken truth falling into place. When you helped me during the storm, she added, your silence felt different. I finally understood that your quiet is shaped by care, not dismissal. Ethan held her eyes for a long moment, and in that wordless exchange, Selah sensed a shift. Not small, not fleeting, something deepening. The regulator emitted a soft tone signaling completion, but neither of them moved immediately. Selah took a slow breath. There is a kind of silence that lithari reserve for someone we hold in high regard, she said. It is called honored stillness. It means we choose to share silence with them because their presence brings peace. She hesitated, her markings glowing faintly along her jawline. I realized today that I offered you that silence without meaning to. Ethan did not speak. He did not need to. His silence in that moment was gentle, warm, and present in a way that wrapped around her like a quiet shelter. She saw the truth in his expression, in the calm of his posture, in the depth behind his eyes. Her voice fell to a whisper. I no longer misread your silence, Ethan. I understand it now. And the silence that followed felt as sacred as any prayer she had ever known. The atmospheric regulator room dimmed into its low-power night cycle, leaving gentle streaks of blue drifting across the walls like calm tides. Ethan and Selah stepped out into the main corridor, where the lights softened to a quiet glow that made the outpost feel almost like a place between waking and dreaming. They walked without urgency, their steps falling into an easy rhythm, the air warm enough now that Selah no longer felt the earlier chill from the storm. She glanced toward the wide observation window ahead, drawn by the faint shimmer of the planet turning below. Ethan followed her gaze, and without a word, he shifted course with her, allowing the quiet to guide them both. The window stretched across the wall in a seamless arc, revealing a canvas of stars scattered across the dark. The last traces of the storm drifted over the planet's horizon like thin silver threads. Selah placed her hand lightly against the cold glass, feeling the deep hum of the outpost beneath her palm. "When I was young," she said softly, "my mentor taught me that silence is the language of the universe. Words are only our attempts to translate it." Ethan stood beside her, close enough for her to sense the warmth of him, yet not close enough to intrude. He looked out at the stars, his posture relaxed, his presence steady. She turned her head slightly, watching him, studying the calm that radiated from him. "Today," she continued, "I learned that silence can have more than one meaning. It can wound, it can heal, and sometimes it can bring two paths together when words might chase them apart." Ethan shifted his gaze toward her, his expression open, inviting her to finish the thought. She let the silence fill the space first. "It felt right to do so. When I believed your silence was an insult, I felt alone," she admitted. "But when I learned what your silence truly held, I felt." She paused, searching gently for the human equivalent. "Safe." Ethan's breath eased out slowly, almost like relief, though he never broke eye contact. The stillness between them deepened, but not with tension. It expanded, soft and warm, like a bridge built without tools or blueprints. Selah stepped a little closer, guided not by certainty, but by trust. "In my culture," she said, "we mark a turning point with a moment of chosen stillness. It is not spoken, it is not declared, it is simply shared." Ethan listened, silent in the way she now understood best. She placed her palms together at her center, a gesture of quiet reverence, then lowered them, not as a formal ritual, but as an offering of connection. Ethan mirrored the posture gently, imperfectly, but with intention. The mirrored gesture warmed her more deeply than the temperature-controlled air ever could. Outside the window, the thin silver traces of the departing storm drifted farther, swallowed by the darkness of space. The outpost settled into complete calm, its systems at rest, its halls wrapped in soft night. Selah let her eyes fall half-closed, not in prayer this time, but in simple acknowledgement. "This silence," she whispered, "is one I choose to share with you." Ethan did not answer with words. He simply remained beside her, steady, present, and warm in the soft glow of the observation deck. And in that unbroken quiet, she felt the universe settle into a shape that made sense. A silence not of misunderstanding, not of distance, but of connection. A silence that felt, to both of them, like a prayer finally understood.